Good morning and welcome to the daily cyber briefing for Monday the 13th of January. I'm Stephen Ridgway and I'm happy to be back. Hopefully you enjoyed having Rich from the Uncle Rich from the Cyber Agony Uncles filling in whilst I've been away down in what turned out to be not cold and not snowy Devon for a few days, which was rather nice. Anyway, let's get stuck into the things that have been going on over the last couple of days. There is a trend towards improving the detection evasion of website skimmers, which we've seen going on for a while. So, certain sorts of skimmers are well known. MageCart was a big thing. It remains a serious threat, but it was a big thing a while back. There are various other things along those lines going on. However, there's an interesting article in Hacker News. It talks about how skimmers that are being applied to WordPress are evading detection by injecting themselves into database tables. So the example here is where malware has been embedded into the WordPress WP options table with the option of widget block, thus allowing it to avoid detection by scanning tools and remain persistent on compromised sites. Usual sort of stuff happens. This particular campaign, quite a sophisticated piece of malware. It tracks to see what the user is doing on the website and only actually as it were becomes active at the point where a user is being is about to check out and will be entering credit card numbers, expiration dates, CVV numbers, and so on, billing information effectively. At the point where the user goes to fill in their credit card details, the malware steps in and presents a well-crafted fake payment page in order to capture the numbers. So reasonably clever. Once you're aware of how this stuff works, though, you can detect for it. It is worth checking if you are running e-commerce sites. It's worth checking that you have detections in place for this sort of stuff, and that you're aware that malware can these days be hidden. These days, it sounds like it makes me sound so old. I am, haha. But it is another area where malware can be squirreled away and hidden, is actually within the database tables of legitimate database tables on the site itself. So yeah, have a read, have a think, take action if required. Yeah, sometimes old-fashioned methods of compromise, which we kind of all thought were understood well enough that nobody gets caught by it, well, sometimes they pop back up again as being actively focused on by particular groups. And one that Trend Micro came across in some analysis that has been published, and I came across it on the Cybersecurity News website this morning. The Trend Micro has been analysing the use of the desire for people to download cracked or otherwise free versions of paid software. Yes, we are all aware that software theft is theft, and I remember all the adverts that were around in, when would that have been? Probably the 90s. However, whilst we all thought that everybody was aware, if you're downloading dodgy software from sites with cracked versions of software in, expect the thing that you're actually downloading to be full of nasties. Turns out a lot of people are still either unaware or don't care, or are just willing to take the risk, because stealing a bit of software is clearly more important than running the risk of having your devices compromised and all your data nicked. Actually, interestingly, there was a while back, I don't remember, I probably haven't had this discussion out for a while, but there was a conspiracy theory that it was actually the legitimate owners of the software, the legitimate vendors of the software, that were supporting malware being introduced into cracked versions of their software if they weren't actually actively engaged in doing it, because it puts people off stealing the software. So it's quite, I don't know, turn myself in. I'm going to stop wearing a tinfoil hat if I'm not careful, but conspiracy theorists, there is some logic behind that. Anyway, so it's on the rise again. At the moment, the favoured method of persuading people to do stupid shit is through YouTube tutorials. Also, search result manipulation and shortened links are common, as are password protected archives. So effectively, you can persuade, so having got to the point where you've persuaded the user that stealing the software is better than actually paying for it, you can get the malware ridden versions, or some of it is just malware with the name of a well-known installer for the executable. This stuff is now hosted in all sorts of places, even some quite legitimate looking places. So watch out for these things, and just remember, data theft, people stealing data are determined, and will play on your the psychology of how you do these things. So we'll be persuading you to do stuff you really shouldn't. So just be aware of that. And the easy way to avoid this one, by the way, is only download and install software from the original manufacturer, like the original vendor's site, the developers themselves, or understand enough to be able to look into what you're downloading before you actually run it on a machine that's got access to anything you care about. One interesting area of controlling malware is to control, so different subject completely, is to control the domains that malware talks to, isn't it? So I think it's commonly understood that malware will often talk back to predefined domain names, if not predefined IP addresses, but predefined domain names, which are then redirected to the attacker's infrastructure in the background in order for to run command and control environments. And so long as the attacker is in command of DNS for that particular name, they can point the malware to talk to wherever they've chosen to put the command and control infrastructure at any particular time. So it makes it easy to move it around, blah, blah, blah. However, one of the things that has resulted in, of course, is that as malware becomes obsolete, various pieces of malware out there are left talking to or they're trying to resolve domains that may no longer resolve at all, or may point to old things, or, as it is increasingly common, may be stumbled upon and bought up by everyone from researchers through to other malware groups, other attacker groups. So if you are curious as to how this works and what happens under these circumstances, well, the answer is for as little as $20 a domain, you can buy some of these old unused malware host domains. If you can then point them to your own infrastructure, you have all of a sudden gained a whole load of access to botnets and so on and so forth that are still out there but are doing very little at the moment. Excuse me. It has been used as a research technique to see how much old malware is still floating around out there, and the answer is actually surprisingly a large amount. Would I recommend you buying up these domains? Probably not, because you don't want to be associated with these sorts of things, at least not publicly. Even for research purposes, you've got to be careful how you approach doing this sort of stuff. But bearing in mind also old malware can be backdoored and so on and so forth. There's all sorts of reasons why this is a pit of snakes. But it is interesting to know that we may think of particular sorts of malware as having kind of fallen out of fashion. They're off the radar. They've all died out. It doesn't really matter anymore. But they can pop back to life as simply as somebody buying the domain names that the malware talks to and then pointing them at something that actually works. Interesting article in the Hacker News covering this. Definitely worth having a read if this is an area that you are concerned about. Okay, IBM has announced that there is a vulnerability in its robotic process automation solution that allows attackers to obtain sensitive data. So the vulnerability is tracked as CVE 2024 51456, and it's can allow remote attackers, to exploit cryptographic weaknesses that lead to compromise of sensitive information. There is a security bulletin and mitigating actions that can be taken in order to deal with this. And there are a bunch of versions which are vulnerable. Robotic automation, by the way, robotic process automation. Kind of like the if you've not come across it or not used it, it is effectively systems, just as it literally does what it says on the tin. So if you are finding that you have people, analysts, for example, doing the same things over and over again, you can use robotic process automation to reliably repeat these things. I can, most of people of my age and greyness will look at that and go, well, surely that's what we used to do with scripts. Well, actually, yeah, having played with robotic process automation, it is kind of just a bit like scripts with a fancy front end that make it easy to build the long and complicated scripts. It doesn't do anything very clever, but then equally, it sort of came out at about the same time that SAW was the thing that you had to have. The trend of the moment was my security tool must have some SAW capabilities. Well, kind of like the background SAW and robotic process automation and scripting and all the rest of it, all broadly is just looking for stuff that you can automate and doing it instead of getting people to do it. Very simple stuff, certainly not worth the hype. However, there are occasions when things like robotic process automation are very useful. If you have got people that can knock together scripts, they can knock together scripts faster using this sort of tooling. Can't say personally I would be keen to spend IBM type prices on something to do this. However, if you are an IBM shop, then clearly this integrates all the other things. Blah blah blah. Anyway, look, there are vulnerabilities. You don't want your stuff because of the level of access that something like a robotic process automation tool needs in order to do many of the jobs. It is entirely possible that it will have domain level access or whatever. The number of organizations that actually really apply least privilege restrictions to this sort of stuff is quite small. Not because it's hard to do, but just because it is time consuming to do, and it requires good ITIL processes to maintain, keep it up to date, make sure it's secure. You name it. You're removing the robotic process with a whole load of complicated processes for managing the environment in which you've just simplified, in my experience. However, it is possible to do, blah, blah, blah. So if it's out there and it's just been chucked in